To begin by thanking the Lloyd's Register Foundation for what they do to promote research, innovation and education in this area. And I should explain, because I think this is an international audience, which is fantastic. I should explain that I was, between 2010 and 2014, the British Minister for Universities and Science. And one of the things I worked on was an issue which has become very topical again in Britain in the last few weeks, which was industrial strategy and how it relates to the promotion of science and technology in particular. And I would like just to explain where I think government fits in and then take you through the priorities we identified in high tech. And in Britain, when it comes to promoting technology through industrial strategy, I would say the conventional wisdom has been that the only kind of things you can really trust a government with, given that governments do tend to mess up and get things wrong, but the only thing you can trust them with is what's called horizontal policies. Tax breaks, lower rates of tax, investing in skills, the kind of general things across a whole society that you might hope would boost your ability to generate new technologies and exploit them. But I increasingly concluded that, admirable though that was, it was not enough. And that in addition, in the terminology, we needed vertical policies, specific, targeting specifics, and two types of specifics in particular. One was places, of which the most urgent issue in Britain is promoting economic growth and revival in our leading cities. We have a very unusual economic structure. We've got London, which is this fantastic global city. Then of our next set of cities, the next 7 or 8 cities, all of them have a GDP per head below the national average, which is a very odd structure of cities compared with most other advanced Western countries. So what we gain is this extraordinary global city that we're in now, but what we lose is that Birmingham, where I come from, Manchester, Leeds, don't have the same kind of performance as Milan or Frankfurt or Chicago or Los Angeles. So place is one priority. But the other priority, which I particularly focused on and was my ministerial responsibility, was technology. Now, in the US, contrary to some of the rhetoric about limited roles for government and the operation of the market, in the US, there is enormous support for public support for technologies, innovative new technologies, general purpose technologies, on their long journey from the lab to the marketplace. And that public support takes them closer to the marketplace than we do in Britain and is pretty indiscriminate. They don't have to pick and choose because essentially America has a security strategy that there should be no significant technology anywhere in the world where the US is not a world leader. And they have the resources to promote that through federal and state funding. But we in Britain, like other medium-sized economies, don't have that kind of resource. So inevitably, we have to be selective. And people are wary of governments being selective, but saying we want to promote technology in general is admirable, but I don't think gets you very far. So there was expert advice that came to me from the chief scientist, from the research councils, from other bodies, on technologies which passed the following criteria. They had to be significant new areas of research where we had a research strength, we had a research capability. Secondly, there had to be some kind of British business capacity to exploit those technologies. And thirdly, they should be technologies of global significance with a global market. And we came up with a list of 8 great technologies. Other countries did similar exercises. So I'm now going to take you through our 8 great technologies, and I think you will recognize them from similar exercises in the US and Germany. And indeed, I'd have been a bit worried if it was a completely eccentric list, different from everyone else. But let me take you through what we regard as the 8 great technologies which we can advance in the UK with public support. We start with the digital revolution, big data, e-infrastructure. And although other countries have more powerful computers than we do, in fact, if you look at those kind of lists of the world's 500 most powerful computers, I think there's about 20 or so in Britain, many more in the China and the US. So we don't claim to have the world's most powerful computers. We have some distinctive capacity, however, in writing smart software that gets the most out of your computer. And there is a theme here which will run through these technologies. And so we thought we had got some distinctive capacities. We're very good at energy efficient computing. And when you move from the macro scale to the micro scale, there's an argument that the company anywhere in the world has done the most to reduce our energy use is ARM, because of the sheer quality of the programs it puts into the chips in all of the mobile phones we use, so that you get more activity for lower energy input. So the fundamental, the digital economy. Second, a particular aspect of that, which is satellites, especially small satellites. Because I see satellites as increasingly significant, both as collectors of data, particularly about our world, and also transmitters of data. And again, when you look at, there are many other countries that have fantastic satellite programs. When you look at British capability, we have an unusual history in space. We're the only country to have had a launch capacity and then to have renounced it. So we have no launch capacity now. It's no accident that it was a great British book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We are, when it comes to satellites, we're endlessly trying to hitch a lift on someone else's rocket. And if you're always trying to hitch a lift on someone else's rocket, you are looking for low-cost options. It's very expensive launching a big, heavy satellite. If you can squeeze a small satellite into the void, if you think of the top of a rocket being launched with a great big satellite in the middle, if you think of it, around the edges, there's voids into which you can squeeze small satellites. With, for me as a layman, surprisingly primitive launch systems, sometimes literally a bit of metal and a spring that sort of releases them out into low Earth orbit at the right moment. So because we wanted to save money on the cost of actually launching satellites, as we're always having to pay someone else to do it, we're very good in small satellites. I would argue probably world leaders in small satellites. And I should declare an interest. Since standing down from politics, I have joined the board of one of those small satellite companies, Surrey Satellites. So satellites as collectors and transmitters of data. And thirdly, another crucial application of the big data revolution, and which is robotics, autonomous systems, the Internet of Things. You can, in fact, you can think of robots as agents acting within the Internet of Things. And again, we have some distinctive British strengths here. We were world leaders in the early stages of mobile phones, in 2G, 3G. We rather lost the lead in 3G, partly because the auction that we ran for our mobile phones was so successfully designed by economists that it extracted over £20 billion from the industry, and it took some time to recover from that auction. And in 4G, we're respectable but no better. We are making a significant effort to become early major players in 5G, which is fundamental to the really enabling the pervasive operation of the Internet of Things. And we can't do it on our own, but it's very interesting at places like the University of Surrey, Southampton, Cambridge, but at Surrey in particular, you'll find a partnership with Huawei, for example, and writing the software, particularly the secure software that you need for interconnection in the Internet of Things is, again, a distinctive skill. So we are so that was my third technology. And those have so far all been kind of dry technologies. But in Cambridge, they say the future is the convergence of dry and wet science. And now we turn to the wet sciences. And of course, this extraordinary coincidence, really, that just when the world is making these fantastic advances in digital science, we crack the biological code that shapes us. And what do we find? We find it essentially comes in a digital form. It is absolutely suited for the digital world. And the famous discovery of Watson and Crick of the structure of DNA, who famously, you can visit the pub in Cambridge, which they went to one lunchtime, saying very loudly to the regulars in the pub in Cambridge, we've discovered the secret of life, which actually you hear in British pubs quite often. But on this occasion, it was true. And they had discovered with the structure of DNA a crucial digital code of biological significance. So for that, I identified, again, some areas where we have distinctive skills. One is synthetic biology, applying engineering principles to biological systems, with the ideal that you should be able, sitting in your lab, to slice and dice and order a bit of DNA and instruct a lab as to where you'd like it inserted into a cell, where there is fantastic opportunities for global standards to be written so that this form of biological engineering is possible. And there are 3 countries where, above all, synthetic biology is being developed: China, the US, and the UK. And if we can work together, we can set standards that will be applying globally. I was also very excited and persuaded by the case for cell therapies. And then 6th on my list was agricultural technologies, because these biological principles don't just apply to human medicine, they apply in agriculture. And there are incredible advances in agriculture now possible, and we have set ambitions like the ambition of generating 20 tons of wheat from a hectare of land within the next 20 years, compared with an average crop in the UK at the moment of about 11 tons of wheat from a hectare. Massive challenges, but again, when you try to say, well, what can Britain add to it? We've got the advantage of a long historical records of, we've got some of the world's oldest and longest established agricultural research centres, which have been keeping records of wheat from around the world for 150 years, almost as long as the Lloyd's Register has been in existence. So we've got very long historical data sets and very large and extensive collections of wheat from around the world. We are also world leaders in animal genetics. It's up in Scotland, in the Roslin Institute, that they are world leaders in breeding successive generations of chickens that convert chicken feed into flesh more and more efficiently. For any given amount of chicken feed, you get twice as much chicken now as 20 years ago, which is a transformation in the efficiency and performance of a biological system. And those chickens, 10,000 of them, and their eggs are sold to China, which grows all the chicken, which has millions, if not billions, of chickens. And then Roslin sets to work so that by next year they've got a new brand of chicken, which is worth the Chinese investing in and buying all over again, rather than breeding the previous year's crop, because they've made an incremental improvement in the efficiency of the chicken. So animal science, agri-science as well. Now, my last 2 were in 2 other areas, which was advanced materials, where, again, because of a series of accidents, we have some distinctive capabilities. There's obviously fantastic things happening in other sides of the world, but other parts of the world, but because particularly of our record in working in nuclear fusion, for example, you need to develop advanced materials. Because of our involvement in aerospace, we're very interested in high-tech materials. And then finally, 8th was energy storage technologies, a global challenge of enormous significance. So those were 8 technologies which our scientists and experts were excited by intellectually, but also as an opportunity for commercialization and advance. And we put £600 million into those, and they continue to be supported. And I believe that one of the responsibilities of government is to try to help big general purpose technologies on the journey to market. It's very hard to find any big technology that hasn't got to market without a large amount of public support. And our analysis of our problem in Britain was that we were stopping the public support too soon, long before it was a really commercial, investable proposition, and then beating up on ourselves that somehow Britain was risk averse or Britain wasn't sufficiently entrepreneurial, when the fact is we were expecting our businesses to take greater risks than they had to take in other leading Western countries. It is part of the legitimate role of government, national governments, to be bearers of risk. That's one of the things that national governments exist to do, to take bigger risks than any other player in a national society can do, and this is one of their roles and how they can promote technology. And as well as funding them, there are other things governments can do. You can write technology roadmaps, convene groups of experts, both from the business community, from the science community, from the world of venture capital. And if you just write down where you think the technology is going and the key research challenges you're trying to address, you may find that there's some areas where the commercial sector is willing to invest, there are some areas where there's already public investment, and there are some gaps. And between you, perhaps with co-funding, you can agree how to plug those gaps. Now, these technology roadmaps are not perfect. Nobody's got perfect foresight. You can only do this as a grown-up, recognizing you're going to make some mistakes. It's never going to play out exactly as you expect. But it's better than doing nothing. And they were incredibly valuable exercises that led to specific investments in particular applications of those technologies. Secondly, there's another way governments can help as well as money is regulation and standard setting. If you look at the advance of some of new technologies, from driverless cars to innovative launch vehicles, they need a regulatory regime in order to function. And it's an important role of government to provide that legal framework so people know what the risks are and those are manageable. So early on, becoming a leader in standard setting in new technology and shaping standards that enable them to function is really important. If you're developing an innovative space vehicle that uses lift through the atmosphere and then thrust out in space, you will find yourself extremely perplexed as to whether you're regulated by the civil aviation authorities because you're using lift, or whether you are regulated as an innovative space vehicle because you'll then use thrust. And those type of uncertainties, complications, inhibit the development of innovative technologies unless you help their way by writing regulations or as a minimum providing necessary exemptions for them to function. A third is providing test beds, providing safe areas where you can experiment with new technologies, where you can link up. And there's a paradox that although the digital economy is a crucial driver of globalization, what I, again, as a layman, have increasingly discovered is actually it's happening one street or one city at a time. And how you link up a city so that that's where the motor car, the heating system in the flat, the people running the public transport system can all have access to a same multiple data sets to help understand and model the functioning of that city. A lot of the most exciting things happening in the digital economy are happening city by city, and we can invest in and promote British cities alongside other cities around the world as smart cities where those type of experiments are possible. And then finally, there is smart purchasing, being willing for government to buy early and take a risk. And again, it's where the Americans are so far ahead of us. You go to conferences in America. I remember going to a guy who was putting an organ on a chip, modeling the behavior of an organ on a computer chip. And it was clearly at a very early experimental stage. And I said, how are you funding it? He said, well, I've sold the first 20,000 to the US military before I've made one that will work. Because they think it would be handy their argument is we need it in military theatre. If we are trying to treat soldiers seriously injured in combat, this is potentially useful. And they had written a nice fat contract with a check attached, non-dilutive financing, which is what these innovators and entrepreneurs like. And if that didn't work, there would not have been a scandal in the US government that they'd spent the money on a organ on a chip that didn't function. They would have known that part of the security objectives of the US was that they should always promote those technologies. And you've got to be willing to take that type of risk if you wish to help entrepreneurs. So there are genuine things that governments can do. Now, these I proposed the 8 great technologies 4 years ago now, and the world moves on, and they are, at the moment, there is an exercise going on to update and refresh them, which I think will feed through into the industrial strategy. These things do change, and there's a fine balance to strike. As we learn more about how technology is advancing, there are some areas where we will find that our early hopes have not been fulfilled. There'll be other areas which people get more excited about. Quantum being fed into that very early opening kind of picture of e-infrastructure and digital infrastructure. Probably quantum making is now recognized as more significant than I probably would have said a few years ago. So, of course, it has to change, but you mustn't change it so fast that nobody can rely on patient capital and patient funding to help them on the long journey. So I think technology is incredibly exciting, and linking technology and public policy is also very exciting. There is this kind of picture of the solitary scientist or the brilliant entrepreneur who on their own achieve these extraordinary triumphs of creating new businesses and creating new products. From looking at the evidence, that isn't really how it happens. Behind them, there are incredibly sophisticated support networks, environments, funding systems, research institutes, universities, venture capitalists that make all this possible, and trying to ensure that you have a healthy, vibrant, effective ecosystem behind them so that they can function is really important. Thank you very much indeed. Well, it looks, I think actually we've got, as I'd hoped, we've just got a few minutes left. So if anybody had any questions or indeed comments, I'd be very happy to take them. And if you wanted to name yourself and your organisation, that'd be very helpful. Yes, Duncan. I think there is a roving mic. Yep, hear it.
Thank you for a very interesting summary of your position as Minister. I'm Dougal Goodman from the Foundation for Science and Technology, a former Minister, I should say. Do you think there should be a golden share for companies that have been supported by the British government in developing their technology?
I think probably not. I mean, it would lower... The fact is Britain is a relatively small, open economy, and it is inevitably going to be the case that down the track, these are companies that there'll be German or American or Chinese companies that want to take a stake in them or take them over. And in general, I think that's how Britain has always worked. We're too small, I think, to be able to be protectionist. My aim was always to grow these, to offer sufficient support early on that at least these enterprises had deep enough roots that if they were bought up by an overseas company, they couldn't move them lock, stock and barrel abroad. And if you look at Demis Hassabis and DeepMind, that's a classic example where Google bought the technology. I actually think Google got it at quite a bargain price. But anyway, they bought the technology, but the research activity remains in the UK. And I think trying to invest them sufficient that you can say we've got a critical mass here, we've got a group of really smart people doing important work, it can't all be transferred to Korea or the West Coast or Shanghai, is a better kind of defence than a legal one through a golden share. Yes, lady in the front.
I'm Ruth Bumfrey from the Lloyds Register Foundation. So my question is about the role of charities in that innovation process. And as a foundation, we are trying to look at our applications, accelerating applications to market. How do we make the world a safer place by taking technologies forward? I wonder what you think of that, what space charities have in there, and if you think charities have a good role, if you can give us some good examples of where you've seen it done effectively.
Well, the example where it's done most effectively is in the life sciences. And in Britain, we are incredibly fortunate with bodies like the Wellcome Trust and charities linked to particular diseases or problems from, Cancer Research UK, for example. We are very lucky to have in the life sciences that kind of network of funders that is up there alongside governments and the pharmaceutical industry as a major funder. Now, the challenge is non-life sciences. And there are a lot of people working in engineering or physics who are rather jealous of the life scientists' access to these very substantial charitable funds. So charitable funds that innovate and help promote the use of robotics to help people, or non-life science, non-biological, non-disease-based innovation, I think there's a gap in the market. That's where the funding from charities is much smaller. Yes, go ahead.
Themis Prodromakis, University of Southampton. Thank you for sharing so honestly your views on how Britain's became Great Britain effectively by addressing these niche areas. As you said, there are certain constraints in terms of getting to innovation that has to do with the availability of funding, and in the US it's done probably much better. What's your view on Brexit?
I think Brexit makes the environment tougher. I wish we had remained partners in the EU, not least because partnership in programs like Horizon 2020 and the European Research Council is not just a source of funding, it actually helps create networks where you can work together. And these problems aren't solved by one discipline or one institution. And and the kind of links that you saw with the leading universities and research institutes across Europe were very good. But we have voted for Brexit, and and now we have to make it work. And it's quite interesting. First of all, if you were to look at Europe's leading universities, it is fascinating. They tend to be, the top 20 are almost entirely in the UK and Switzerland. And so an EU science programme that is tough on the outers, and Switzerland are themselves having some rather fraught negotiations with the EU at the moment, a network that doesn't include British and Swiss universities is not really harnessing some of the best institutions available across Europe. So I hope everybody can be sensible and make something work. And then also, and I had an exchange with Theresa May about this the other week, it makes it even more important that Britain has networks of scientific and technological collaboration across the world. And I think it's putting renewed energy into this. When I was the minister, I created something called the Newton Fund, which was to promote science collaboration with emerging powers, India, China, Brazil. And I think it's giving renewed impetus to those type of links internationally. So I think it's a pity that it's happened, but we can make the best of it. And there's just a 25% chance it leaves us to be more innovative and more bold than we otherwise would have been. Yes, lady there.
Good morning. My name is Marianne Stuiver. I'm from Wageningen. That's in the Food Valley of the Netherlands. Thank you very much for your speech. And I was intrigued by the concept of governments being bearers of risk. And I was wondering if you could say a bit more on the challenges or maybe the tensions between governments, public and industries concerning these risks.
Well, I should have said, you see, I am a conservative. So I worked for Margaret Thatcher many years ago. So I am wary of big roles for government. And I'm wary of governments simply setting themselves the task of kind of making us all equal. I think equality matters, but redistributing. But then are you left as a conservative in a kind of libertarian position where you head to the hills of Montana and say government hasn't got any legitimacy at all? And that is madness. So why do we as conservatives believe in government? That's the kind of backdrop to my investigation. And I think one of the most powerful roles of national governments is that it remains the case that the nation state is, for most purposes, the biggest risk pooling arrangement that we've got. That's why I see that as actually one of the arguments for the welfare state. It's the best agency we've got to help us if you're suddenly struck down with long-term sickness or dealing with the costs of old age. And I think it's equally for technology. And as I said, I think we had been reluctant to take this on. And I have to say that sometimes the whole official machine was very wary of governments taking risk. And we have got investigative agencies within Parliament, the Public Accounts Committee, where if you make a mistake, you'll be hauled before the Public Accounts Committee. And quite possibly, in 10 years' time, I don't know, imagine that cell therapies fail to take off as a significant way of delivering new medical treatment and growing new organs and growing new limbs and all that. I'm not a pessimist, but imagine that happens. So there will be some picky investigation in 10 years' time as kind of why out of the £600 million budget for the 8 great technologies did you put £75 million into cell therapies and they haven't delivered? A classic example of the inability of government and its failure and let's look at the records and who gave the advice and how do you take the decision. And I always say, right to win, if you operate in that environment, you cripple your ability to discharge one of the legitimate roles of government. The honest answer is we couldn't know for sure. It was a legitimate decision to take. Life is uncertain, and if we waited until we were certain before we took any decision, we'd all be sitting around forever waiting for governments to back any technology. And you just hope that when the investigation happens, that kind of grown-up argument is listened to. But we've got to win that argument. And it's interesting that the foundation is about safety. We're in a highly risk-averse environment where when anything goes wrong, you have to find out why it's gone wrong. Well, we all have to take risks, and part of the role of government is to take risks. Yes, gentleman down at the front.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I'm John Beck from Busan National University in Korea and also University College London. What is your view to resolve issues in association with energy shortages?
Everybody says that one of the problems, especially if you are turning to natural sources of energy which may be intermittent, is efficient ways of storing intermittent power. And also a set of technical problems about how you feed it into the grid and a different type of grid if you have those kind of sources. And we have the particular, and again, because a strategy only makes sense if you exclude certain things. So we weren't trying to do everything. We were saying we need more sophisticated energy storage technologies. And if you can store some of this energy, that in turn will help with the shortages. At the moment, the main way we store energy is when we've got a lot of energy being generated more than we're using, we pump it to a lake at the top of a mountain in Snowdonia, and then at the half time in the football match, when everybody goes to boil a cup of tea, we let the water go down and power a turbine and generate some extra electricity. And that seems to work quite well, but you do hope that in the 21st century there may be some other technologies for storing energy as well, and that's the challenge. This gentleman there.
Good morning, I'm KK from National University of Singapore. I attended this very fascinating workshop last week on this World Economic Forum Global Risk Report, which they do every year. And we had this very interesting discussion about emerging technology and how it's moving at that rate. And one of the top category of concerns that many people have at this point in time will be this emerging technology in artificial intelligence and robotics. We are just wondering at that point in time, it was a very interesting discussion, whether any government at all could be agile enough to regulate against such emerging technology from the viewpoint of perhaps accidental or incidental kind of effects on society as a whole. So while we are speaking, as you know, Google is releasing their phone and it'll be embedding artificial intelligence. So we have a bunch of very clever people, young kids, they're out there just to think of clever ideas to do new things. So the idea, the question I guess is how could our governance be agile to be able to take care of the interests of the public?
Well, this is another area we're interested in. And again, it's fascinating. It's a good example. The paradox of all these things is these are universal technologies, but the way they develop reflects so clearly national characteristics. So in Germany, they're way ahead of us in robots and in manufacturing processes. Incredibly sort of sophisticated manufacturing. In Japan, with its demographics, they're particularly strong in humanoid robots, or robots with features that enable them to displace humans. I have myself cuddled Paro, the seal-like Japanese robot that's supposed to keep company for elderly people living on their own, and didn't quite fully compensate for a human being, if you ask me, but it was an ingenious attempt. Now, artificial intelligence, I'm I think that I am not one of the pessimists about this. And again, I'm a layman, but my impression is that we are making progress in artificial intelligence in highly specific circumstances. Obviously, initially it was, I can't remember the name of the paradox, but that you could produce an IBM program to defeat a grandmaster at chess, but you couldn't produce a program for a robot to serve a cup of tea to an old lady, which is a far more demanding bit of software than winning the chess game, wasn't it? And now we've got Go, the strategy game, which was actually part of the DeepMind Demis Hassabis contribution to Google. So we've now got AI that can go beyond playing chess to more open, interactive games like that strategy game. But I still think we're a long way off a fully integrated system that can do all the different things that a human can. So I think we'll have a whole range of specialized uses rather than a single integrated entity that... so the systems that you write to win that Go strategy game are not the same as systems you write to enable you to control a limb so that it can pick up a cereal box from a kitchen cabinet and pour the cereal into a bowl for a disabled person. Governments do need, what is happening, I think there are some issues around agency that are becoming increasingly important. And with our strengths in law, I would say that the software programmers will increasingly be having to take legal responsibility for the actions of the entities that are applying their software. And the decisions that you take in cold blood when you write the software might be somehow more repellent than the decisions you take in that a human would take. I'm trying to give you an example. So if there's a coach driver who's lost control of his coach going down a hill and he's got 50 passengers on the coach and the only way to avoid the accident is to run down a pedestrian, I think, although it'd be horrible and tragic, we could understand why a human in an appalling dilemma like that would act in that way. Writing the software program in advance for the driverless vehicle to make that calculation is, I think, is a fundamentally different thing. And your legal liability when the relatives of the pedestrian say you deliberately wrote a program that had that effect has not yet been tested. And I think that this is a very good note on which to end because, look, this is all science and tech, but actually there was a great British writer, academic, wrote about technology a long time ago called Eric Ashby. He wrote a brilliant book about technology which said technology is where science encounters people. Technology is where science and humanity interact. As soon as you're thinking about users and agency and responsibility and liability, it ceases to be simply a problem in the lab. It interacts with our moral judgments, our cultures, our legal systems, and it's really important that all this technology is developed in an environment where we're very aware of the ethical and legal framework. And I sometimes think that the technophiles don't fully recognise. It's just like they need governments to help them get on their way. They don't fully realise that they can only operate. They're only legitimate. It's only accepted if their technologies function with some wider moral framework. Thank you very much indeed.